Welcome back to the shop. I'm often asked what is the best brand bike to buy, motocross bike or model to buy. I'm going to try to answer that in this video, although I'm not going to tell you which one's the best. I don't believe there really is the best, but I'm going to tell you the strengths and the weaknesses for each individual brand, some models, and we're just going to talk some dirt bike stuff for a little bit here. If you're a subscriber to my channel, you already know who I am and what I do. If you're new to my channel, well, my name's Chris. I work on dirt bikes for a living, mainly motocross bikes, Monday through Friday, 8-hour days. On the weekend, I ride. At least one day a weekend, at least 50 weekends a year. I'm always at the track. I'm always working on bikes. I've been doing this for, I've been riding most of my life, but I've been working on it for about 30 years now. When you hear me say I probably split over 1,000 motors in my life, I'm not kidding. I probably split well over 1,000 motors in my life. I've been doing this a long time. I've been getting my hands dirty for years. I ride all the time. So I pretty much worked on every brand there is out there. Well, except for maybe the new bikes that have come out, like the Ducati and stuff. I haven't touched any of them yet. But all your KTM variants from Husqvarna, KTM, all your Japanese bikes, Suzuki, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Honda. I've been in all of them motors. I've worked on them things for years, and I'm really familiar with them. As far as what I personally have owned, I've owned all the Japanese bikes, but I have not owned a KTM, Husqvarna, or Gas for myself. Although I've worked on a ton of them, I've ridden a lot of them, I have a lot of experience in them, I just haven't brought one home for myself. You might see that I do own a lot of Yamahas, including these three back here, but I am not brand loyal by any means. I have owned all four of the Japanese brands. It just depends. Throughout the years, it's changed. There are some years I spend on Kawasaki, some years on the Suzuki, the Hondas. Whenever a company's making a bike that fits me, I don't care what color it is. If I like the bike, I'm going to own it. I'm not brand loyal. So I'm not going to tell you which bike to go buy or what brand to go buy. I'm just going to kind of run through each brand and tell you my personal opinion of the pros and cons for that brand, my experience with them, what it's like working on them and owning them long term. There are motocross bike reviews, shootouts you can watch if you're more concerned about, how they ride on the track. Each brand can feel a little bit different, but this is more from the mechanical aspect and owning the bike yourself. What value is this bike going to bring into your garage? So, since I got a Kawasaki here front and center, we'll go ahead and start with the green bikes. Alright, the Kawasaki. Well, in my opinion, they're actually pretty reliable bikes. They're built pretty well. If you own a Kawasaki and you keep up with your maintenance and stuff, you have a good bike that's going to last you quite a while. I would say the biggest shortcoming when I think of a Kawasaki is going to be their assembly line. I've seen some, I don't know what you would call them, some mistakes on their assembly line, some pretty costly mistakes as well. One example, my friend Josh, his bike had 25 hours on it, KX450, and it busted a head gasket. So he brought the bike to me, I pulled the cylinder head off, and when I pulled the bolts that hold the cylinder head down, I noticed some aluminum shavings on the thread of one of the bolts. I looked down at the bolt holes, or the threaded part in the case where the cylinder head bolts go into, and you can see aluminum shavings in there. I cleaned it out. The threads were in perfect shape. Everything was looking good. I came to the conclusion that when they tapped them holes out in the factory, for some reason they didn't clean that part. And so with the aluminum shavings still in the threads, well, it caused it where when they torqued the cylinder head down at the factory, one of the bolts wasn't torqued down properly, and it caused his head gasket to fail. I'm surprised it made it 25 hours, but that's what we found. We fixed it, and it's been good ever since. Another weakness on the KX is they seem to have fuel pump issues from time to time. It's just, out of all the brands out there, I seem to do more fuel pumps on the Kawasaki's, I would say, than a lot of the other brands, and just how it goes. But the rest of the bike is a pretty solid bike. You're getting a good bike if you buy a KX, and they do really good in the hands of like vet riders. I see a lot of older guys own like the KX450s and such, and they do really good in their hands because they keep up their maintenance and stuff. And it is a good bike. Some of the hardware is a little bit cheap on it, I've seen some odd things break. I don't know if this one has that cover. Yeah, there it is. This cover right here. I've seen these bolts on pretty much fresh bikes, not even old, and people go to take this out and it just breaks on its way out. So some of the hardware is a little bit chintzy on it, but otherwise they're good solid bikes. I wouldn't have a problem owning one myself personally. As far as like the suspension, it's kind of hit and miss. Some years and some models have better suspension than others. I would say if you're going to buy a KX, you're probably going to have to set it up for yourself. It's not going to be like, let's say, the Yamahas, where for the most part you can kind of just buy them and throw them on the track. The KX, you're definitely going to have to do a little bit of setup work, but they do come with good suspension components. This one right here actually has the KYB forks on it, which is nice. And I think the 450s usually come with the Showas unless you buy the 450 SR. Now, when it comes to their little bikes, like the 85, the KX 100, the KX 112, that 112 is a fast little bike, I will say that. But they're a little bit dated, I guess you could say. They're heavier than, like, let's say the KTM variant 85s. So, like, if you compare like a KX 85 to a KTM 85 SX, the KTM is probably going to feel a little bit quicker, and it's going to feel lighter and have better suspension. It's just kind of how that goes. And a lot of times when the kids are racing, it's if you're real competitive, it's probably better to put your kid on one of the KTM variant small bore bikes than it is to put them on the KX85. KX85 is a good bike, don't get me wrong. It's just, you know, they've been running the same frame for a lot of years, and it's just kind of a heavy bike. But the electrical system on the KX model bikes, the 4-strokes, 250F and 450, is pretty solid for the most part. I don't really see a lot of starting issues, starter motor, starter clutch, or electrical issues related to no spark or stator going out. It's not really common with them to have issues in that area. Overall, they're pretty solid bikes. It's just, you know, they're a little bit cheaper in some areas. Like I said, the assembly line and some of the hardware is a little bit cheap, and you're probably going to have to tune the suspension in pretty good, maybe even get it revalved or whatever. Otherwise, you're getting a good solid bike. One area that I do like about the KXs is the stability. The overall bike, from the KX 450 to KX 250F, it has a good stable feel to it, and I think that's why a lot of your older vets seem to lean towards these bikes. The frame is pretty compliant. It has good flex. It's just a very stable and comfortable feeling bike when you ride it, especially when you compare it to like the Honda or the Yamaha, which are a little bit more tuned onto the ragged edge, and they don't quite have that natural stable feel that the Kawasaki would have. Kawasaki is definitely more on the stable side of things. Doing a top end on the Kawasaki is not too difficult. You're not going to run into issues with like the cylinder head hitting the frame, or cylinder head bolts hitting the frame when you go to lift them out. They're pretty cut and dry when it's time to do a top end on them. It's one of the easier bikes to do a top end on, in my opinion. Also the same with the bottom end. If you have to pull the whole motor out and do a bottom end, it's one of the easier ones to do a bottom end on, and everything's pretty cut and dry. There's a ton of room to get the motor in and out. They're pretty easy to work on. And being it's a Japanese bike, parts are readily available. Every so often you'll run into a part that's on back order, but for the most part, the part's always available and at a, you know, competitive price. They're not overpriced. Pretty affordable bike. Speaking of affordability, you typically can get a brand new KX out the door a little bit cheaper than you can the YZ or the CRF or the KTM variants. Yeah, their MSRP might be similar to some of the other bikes, but out the door at the dealerships, they're quicker to cut you a break on the KXs, and you can usually get them out the door a little bit cheaper. And I believe that's, you know, if you're looking for a bike, you're more on a budget, you're looking for a brand new bike, the KX is a good solid bike. You're going to get it a little bit cheaper. It's affordable to own. It's easy to work on. So, yeah. All right, let's move on to the next. All right, moving on to the KTM variants. And I say KTM variants because from a mechanics perspective, the Husqvarna, the KTM, and the Gas are all three the same bikes, right? The motors are the same. They use the same parts. They take the same special tools. The procedures on the jobs are the same. The electronics are the same. Yeah, they come with, each variant has its own, personality trait. Like the Husqvarnas here will come a little bit lower, a little bit softer suspension, or they might use a different material for the subframe, but otherwise they're kind of the same bike. So I have this Husqvarna here. We're going to talk about the KTM variants. Well, as you know, these are probably the more expensive bikes on the market, not only in the initial purchase, but also in the parts. The parts are, they're not cheap on these bikes. That goes without saying. And they're not the easiest to work on either. A lot of times, like on the 250Fs, when you go to pull the cylinder head off, it can hit the frame. Sometimes you have to take motor mount bolts out to lower the motor a little bit to be able to get the cylinder head off. It's because it uses studs for the cylinder head. On the KTM 450s, if you're doing a bottom end, the crank has little washers. Well, the 250F does too. And the left and right play of the crank, you have to use these spacers or these shims and get it shimmed out just right. So which means you have to put the case together, measure it, take it back apart, put it back together, measure. Basically what I'm trying to say is these are more, they're tougher to work on. They're more critical to paying attention to the little stuff when you do work on them. They also use things like hydraulic cam chain tensioners up in here, and so there's a procedure you have to follow there to set that up and reset it when you're doing a top end. They're not the easiest to work on. I would say out of all the bikes I'm going to mention today, these are the toughest to work on. They are good bikes. They do suffer in some areas. I find electrical wire issues with these. Up in the steering area here, I don't know if I'll be able to get you up in here, but yeah. Well, anyway, all the wires that come down through here and for this switch and stuff like that, they all get tucked in right here. And you get shorts in these wires. They're very dinky wires. You see how it flexes that whole wire harness right there? And when you pull them out, they're very dinky wires, and they end up breaking. They end up you'll go to hit your start button one day, nothing will happen, and you'll chase it down to the harness right here, and there'll be a broken wire in here. Same with down here on the air box, on the bottom side. Where is it? There's a temperature sensor up in here somewhere. Air intake temperature sensor. The wires for that like to just break, and all of a sudden you'll get a flashing check engine light and you have to go chase it down. They use very, very thin wires on these KTM variant bikes, and that can cause issues. Now they do come with some pretty trick components like Brembo brakes. That's always nice. And the triple clamps, they usually have some pretty nice triple clamps on them. There are a lot of pluses to owning these bikes. The front brakes are usually really good on them. The suspension is usually pretty decent. It can be tuned in pretty well. It's not quite up to like the Yamaha standard where you can just buy it and throw it on the track, but it's pretty good, and it's not too bad and not too hard to get tuned in. Now, like I mentioned, if your kid is racing in the 85 class, you're probably going to be better on one of the KTM variant bikes because they're lighter and the performance is up there pretty good in stock form versus like the KX85 or even the YZ85. But parts are more expensive in general on the KTM variant bikes, right? So that's where I'm going to say if your kid's racing one of the bikes and you're on a budget, as soon as they move up to the 250F class or even the 125 class, it might be time to move them over to a Japanese bike if you're looking to save a little bit of money, because the parts on these KTM variant bikes are oftentimes significantly more expensive. Rear brake pads for these OEM Brembo brakes here, the rear brake pads are about $86 for a set, where on like the YZ you're probably looking at about $34 to $40 for an OEM set of rear brake pads. So that's just to give you an idea. I've seen crankshafts on some of their like the 150 or whatever close to $1,000 just for a crankshaft, where like a YZ 125 crankshaft, you could probably get it for $400 or $500. Now, one thing I can say about the KTM variant bikes is their crankshafts seem to hold up pretty well. If you ever do a bottom end on one of these bikes, you'll notice that they have really nice crankshafts on them on the 4-stroke KTM bikes, and they do hold up very well. I give them credit for that, but they're pricey. If you have to replace it, it's not cheap. In my opinion, the KTM variant bikes are good for the guy that's going to take care of his bike and not beat it up too hard. Because if you're the type of person, let's say you're a 18-year-old kid that's fast as hell and you're just ringing it out, bounce off the Rebler, entering every race you can, and you're wearing the bike out, that bike's going to take you to the bank because the parts are going to be expensive. But I've seen older people, older guys, or even females, or people that just play ride, they don't beat their bikes up very much, get a ton of hours out of these bikes with very little failures, and just go a long ways. I've seen older guys get 350 hours out of them, and not even do a top end. You know, they're just, you know, riding in trails or whatever, but they're good for that. And it's just, I would say if you're a young guy and you're flying through bikes and parts, this might not be the bike for you. They're going to get expensive. But if you're the type of person that takes care of your bike and you don't beat it up too much, these are great bikes. They come with great brakes, like I said. And you can kind of pick and choose which one you want. You know, the Husqvarna, it's a little bit lower, a little bit softer. The gas is a little bit more budget friendly. And then the KTM is, you know, the elite of the elite for their race bikes. And lastly, the steel frame. Some people like it. They claim it has more flex. Some people don't. Some people like the feedback of the aluminum frames. In my opinion, you know, I've been riding for years, and I got tired of steel frames because if you ride your bike a lot and do a lot of big jumps and you ride it hard, at some point you're going to get a crack in the frame somewhere. It's just kind of how it goes. No matter how well you take care of them, steel frames, they flex, and that flex ends up leading to cracks. The aluminum frames don't crack nearly as easily, nearly as much. They age much better long term. One of the things you can do on a new bike is turn your steering wheel straight, measure from the swing arm pivot right here to the front axle, measure that, write it down. And if you're a fast rider, ride your bike for a year or two and then re-measure. Take that measurement again. And you'll probably notice it's expanded a little bit. And the reason it expands a little bit is the frame just starts raking out the front end from hard landings. It just starts raking out like this after a while. That's something steel frames suffer from. Aluminum frames don't quite have that issue. Matter of fact, I remember back in 2006, they asked DeCoster what he thought about Ricky Carmichael on the RMZ 450 versus the RM 250 that he had the year before. And what does he think about going from the steel frame to the aluminum frame? Well, because if you remember, the RM 250 two-stroke had a steel frame, but the RMZ 450 had aluminum frame. And DeCoster said one of the things that they noticed is that they can run that aluminum frame pretty much all season. And where the steel frame, they were having to replace it after every 2 races because the frame would start to fatigue and the bike would start feeling different. So keep that in mind. Steel frames have a shorter lifespan, and if you're buying a KTM variant bike and you're a fast, hard rider, you're probably going to wear out the frame, you know, 50, 100 hours. It's probably going to start feeling different. Yes, the bike will still keep going as long as you don't have any cracks in the frame, but the bike's going to start feeling a little bit, just a little bit loose, you know. And so keep that in mind. If you're enjoying this video, check down the description. I'm going to have 3 links down there. One to a video on what to look for when you're buying a good used bike. Another video on how many hours are too many hours. And the last video is going to be the difference between owning a 4-stroke and a 2-stroke. The suspension on these KTM variant bikes can be a little bit more difficult. They like to change their tooling quite often, and some of their tools are not cheap. So you're going to have to, if you're owning these KTM variant bikes, you're going to constantly be upgrading your tools for the suspension as they change things throughout the years. Where your Japanese variant bikes and your KYB and Showa stuff, they kind of use the same tools for many years until they have a dramatic change in something. So I'm going to rate these as one of the more difficult bikes to work on. Engine's harder to work on. Harder to get the cylinder head on and off, or the harder to get to the throttle body, electrical. They have a whole junction of wires up in here. It's all just crunched up together, and they're not the easiest to work on. So if you're the type of person that likes to work on your own bikes, but you're not very skilled, this one's going to be a tougher one for you. And parts availability for the KTMs is not that good. It's very common when I have to do a big job, put all the parts into the cart, Rocky Mountain Motorsport or whatever, and then like 1/3 of the parts are on back order and I have to wait for them. That's just how KTMs go. So the parts cost more and they're often on back order. another issue too is sometimes they just stop making stuff for no reason. Quick example, 2017. It was in the year 2019, a 2017 KX250SX was brought to me because of a cracked case. Went to go buy the case, couldn't find it anywhere. Contacted KTM themselves, and they said, nope, discontinued. Long story short, I ended up having to use a set of 2018 cases and retrofit a lot of stuff and also buy extra parts to make it work. But they just, all their 2017 cases were cracking, and so they didn't have any more and they didn't sell anymore. So if you owned that bike in 2019 and you cracked the case, you're kind of screwed. That's the kind of stuff that KTM does when it comes to their parts. It's frustrating as a mechanic. I'm not going to kid you, especially when you go to order parts and a part's on back order and it's going to be 2 or 3 months. And sometimes the customers don't understand. I'm like, look, here's a part number. If you can find it, I'll get your bike done right away. But as of right now, that part is nowhere to be found, and we're just stuck waiting for them. Mine. Otherwise, they're good bikes. They're fancy bikes. They got a lot of cool stuff on them. And yeah, not bad. Alright, the Hondas. Well, I don't have any full-size Hondas here right now, but I do have this little CRF 50, so we'll just use that as our example of a Honda. Hondas are, well, their assembly line is really good. Their fit and finish. You guys have heard that for years. The Honda fit and finish is good, and it is. Their bikes, you can probably take 10 of their brand new bikes, line them up in a row, go through each one, and you're not going to find anything different from one to the next. I mean, they're exact copies, perfect. They come off the showroom floor, very well built. But the newer Hondas with the electric start, the 250F and the 450F, the electric start can be problematic, and there's so many things that can go wrong with it. I often tell people when they ask me, what do I think about the new Hondas? I'm looking at buying one. What do you think about it? I say, they're great bikes. They're great bikes to own. They're built well, all that kind of stuff. But know that there's going to be a day that you show up at the track, you hit that starter button, and it's just not going to do anything. It's just not going to start. For some reason, their starter reduction gear inside the motor, it's basically a torque limiting gear, and it's supposed to break away if it becomes too hard to spin the motor over, so that the starter motor itself, the torque going through it, doesn't crack the case if your motor got locked up or something like that. But that little torque reduction gear is known to just give up for no reason. And then also the starter clutches like to go out on. The starter relay likes to get water in it, or if you pressure wash the bike, and corrosion around the fuse going onto the starter relay. There's just so many things. The starting button itself can get water underneath it and just stop working. There's so many things that can cause these Hondas to not start, and it's quite common. And so if you own one of these, you're probably gonna show up the track one day and not start, and it kind of sucks. And here's the crazier thing about them. You'll go to hit the start button, all you'll get is ticka, ticka, ticka. All you gotta do is go through my videos and type in CRF 450 whatever, it doesn't start or whatever, and you'll see I have 3 videos on the starting issues with these. What makes them difficult to diagnose is the CDI, or the ECU. It pays attention to the stator, and when you hit that start button, if it doesn't sense that stator spinning, the minute you hit that start button, it pulls out on the starter right away. Another safety feature, just in case the motor is locked up, so it wouldn't, it won't crack the cases or anything. But that safety feature they built into it causes headaches, because let's say you have a starter clutch that's slipping. Well, you'll hit this button, all you hear is kick, kick. You don't know if it's a starter clutch, starter relay, starter reduction gear. You don't know. It's not allowing the starter to spin long enough for you to diagnose it with just your ear. You're not going to know what's really wrong with it until you start digging in. It can make them difficult. In 2017, when they first started using this system, and in 2018, it was throwing the dealerships a lot of curveballs. I'm probably the first guy to put a YouTube video up on it, and I think at this point most people know, the dealerships know the issue. But I had bikes that were at the dealerships, they couldn't repair them. The people would bring them to me. I mean, the dealership was already throwing new computers on them, new starter motors. They were throwing the works at them, even new wire harnesses, and it still wouldn't fix it. They brought it to me. I figured it out that for some reason they have the ECU program that if it doesn't sense that motor spinning the very minute you hit that button, it backs out on the starting process altogether. So all you're going to get is click, 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 click. That's my biggest complaint on the Hondas. Otherwise, they're really solid. The crankshafts hold up good. The motor holds up good. The bike itself holds up good. The hardware is of good quality. I mean, everyone knows Hondas. I'm pretty sure most of you guys have probably owned one at least once in your life. It's kind of the staple of the dirt bike, you know. They're good bikes. They don't always have the best suspension, at least as far as the valving and the settings out to showroom floor, but they do give you good quality suspension components, and a lot of times you can dial it into what you need without a revalve. Sometimes you might have to get a revalve, but it's usually not too far off. I will say the 250F and the 450F from 2017 and 18 to current are not the easiest to work on, mainly when it comes to doing a top end. They're a little bit tighter since they've gone to the downdraft intake on them. When you go to pull the cylinder up, all the throttle body and all the electrical wire and all that's just bunched up right in here. It makes them a little bit difficult to do a top end on. Plus, like on the 450, when you go to take the cylinder head bolts out, one of them will hit the frame, and it's not too difficult. You just got to move the head around as you're trying to get that bolt out, and you can get it out. But it can throw you a curveball. I had my brother call me up and say, "Hey man, how do I get this bolt out? It's hitting the frame. Do I have to freaking take the motor mount bolts out?" I said, "No, just lift the head up off the dowel pins a little bit, twist it, and then you get the cylinder head." Oh, okay. So it can throw you little curveballs like that. They're not the easiest to work on, mainly top ends, but they're good solid bikes. They're not as stable as a Kawasaki as far as when you're riding the bike, and that's why typically you'll see your older guys kind of veer away from the Hondas. They kind of fit more of the younger guy. They corner well, and because of that they lack stability, but they're good bikes. Their electronics are pretty good. I don't see many electrical issues with the Hondas unless you're pressure washing. If you're a heavy pressure washer, obviously you can get underneath the start button and cause that to act up, or it likes to get up into the starter relay and cause that to act up. But if you stay away from the pressure washer, or if you're easy with the pressure washer, the electrical issues on the Honda are pretty much 0 to none, except for maybe the starting issue that I just spoke about a minute ago. Parts availability is good, and the parts are affordable. If you do run into something on back order, don't worry, they will get it to you pretty quick. They usually catch up with their back order stuff really nice and quickly. Most of your Japanese brands do, for the most part. Overall, I would have no problem owning a Honda. I've owned several in my life, and I own another one. They're good bikes. Suzuki. Alright, well, this ain't a Suzuki, this is a Yamaha, but I put a Suzuki seat cover on here because I don't have a Suzuki here right now to put front and center, so we're going to have to pretend that this is a yellow Suzuki. Alright, Suzukis. Well, you guys already know they are the outdated bikes of the bunch. They really haven't updated them since, what, 2017, I think. But even though they haven't updated them quite a while, I will say they are quality bikes. I mean, they're built at the same level of quality as most of your other Japanese, all your other Japanese bikes. Far better than anything you'd ever see coming from China, that's for sure. They're built good, and they're reliable. I give them that. They're reliable. They're easy to work on. Right? They're probably one of the easiest to do a top end on. I'm going to say the easiest to do a top end on is probably the Yamaha, as far as 4-strokes. But the 2 second easiest are the Kawasaki and the Suzuki. They're kind of tie. So easy to work on, easy to do a top end on. If you have to do a bottom end on them, they're probably the easiest to do a bottom end on. They very seldom give you any electrical issues. Obviously, they're not electric start, they're kick start, so you don't have to worry about that. But the other electrical stuff, like just producing spark and power to the fuel pump and the fuel injector and stuff like that, they're pretty solid. You don't really have any electrical issues with them. If the bike's taken care of, the motors are solid. You'll get a lot of hours out of it. Yeah, they're just a little bit heavier. And even the suspension, they try with the suspension. They give you some pretty trick stuff, like on the shock, they give you that fancy Showa shock that has the all 3 adjustments right here and stuff. They give you some pretty fancy stuff, but it's just not tuned well from the factory. And so if you buy a RM and you're looking to be competitive, RMZ, and you're looking to be competitive, expect to do some suspension work. It's just how it is. You're going to have to do suspension work, and you're probably going to have to throw some mods at the motor to get the horsepower up there a little bit. But as far as buying a good, solid, reliable bike, especially if you just play ride and ride into the woods or whatever, you just need a good, solid, reliable bike at a good, affordable price. Can't go wrong with Suzukis. They're really good in that aspect. I really do wish they would update their bikes and get up to the game, but then maybe the price would have to come up on them, and You know, again, if you compare them looking at the MSRP, you'd be like, well, that's only $1,000 cheaper than, you know, the other bike or whatever. But out the door at the dealership, you're more likely to get a better deal on them. They're more likely to cut you a break versus, like, let's say the Yamaha, that they can't even keep them in stock. Every time they have one on the showroom floor, it flies, it sells. So they're not going to cut you a break on it. But when they have 4 Suzuki sitting there, and they've been sitting there for a while because everyone keeps buying the Yamaha or the Honda, they're going to cut you a break on the Suzuki. So you're going to get a good, solid, reliable bike for a good price. Just know you're going to have to do some work to the suspension and the motor if you're looking to be competitive on it. Parts availability is good. The prices for the parts are competitive, good. No issues with the parts on the RMZs. I can usually get what I need when I need it, and very seldom is something on back order, and if it is, I usually get it in stock pretty quickly. So overall, they are very cut and dry bikes, and they're another good bike. And last but not least, the Yamaha. As you know, all the magazines are nut hugging Yamahas. They are the bike to kind of have right now currently. We're like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it seemed to be the KTM variant bikes. Well, now it seems to be the Yamaha bikes, and for good reasons. Yamaha bikes come out the box with really good suspension, so you're probably not going to have to do a whole lot to the suspension to get it where you want it, and that's really nice. Oftentimes, if you're a little bit heavier or lighter, a spring swap, a little bit of clicker changes here or there, and you'll probably get what you want and need. You're probably not going to have to revalve them. They come really good right off the showroom floor. And the same can be said about the motor as well. The motors are really good right off the showroom floor, both the 250F and the 450s. Now we're going to talk about the 2-strokes in a minute here, compare them to the KTMs, but let's stay focused on the 4-strokes for a couple minutes here. One of the advantages of these Yamahas is obviously the tuner app. You can connect to it on your phone. You can change your maps. I know some of the other brands are starting to offer that now. Some will make you pay extra for it. I'm not too much up to speed on specifics on that with the other brands, but I can tell you with the Yamaha, it's free. You buy the bike day one, you can hook your phone up to it through Wi-Fi, you can change your maps, you can check your hours, and you can read trouble codes. It's really convenient when you're having to diagnose electrical issues on these bikes. So that's a huge plus on these bikes is the tuner app, in my opinion. The overall fit and finish is really good. I'm going to say it's probably not quite as good as the Honda, but it's pretty damn close. Yeah, overall really good fit and finish. Decent hardware, not the best, but pretty decent hardware. I mean, they save money here and there to get the bike in your hands at affordable price, right? So here's a rear brake lever, and you have this clevis for it right there. Watch when I press it down. Let's see. See a little bit of play right there? And that adds up over here. There's that much play before it starts pressing in. And that actually gets worse with age. It starts wearing out. So on the Yamahas, I'll typically buy an aftermarket one like that, and that kind of takes away a lot of that play. But on your KTM variants, well, this is going to cost a little more money to do this. To have this little ball bearing type thing here. And then even though this one's set up right now to have a lot of play, but we could tune that play out with this adjustment right here. Now be careful if you tune your own bike. If you adjust it too tight and you start pressing the piston in for the master cylinder there, you could end up binding your rear brake up. So be careful with that. But we can tune that play out with these. You don't have that option with your Japanese bikes. So there are some areas on the bike where they're definitely kind of, you know, helping to keep the price down on the bike, I'll say. Like, they don't come with forged triple clamps. They're just typical normal aluminum triple clamps. That being said, they are tuned, right? So they have the right amount of flex. That's part of the package with these Yamahas. They have the right amount of flex that they're looking for to work with the frame, the front end, the whole bike, to give that nice feel that we're looking for. So, you know, be cautious if you just throw triple clamps on a bike. You are going to change the flex characteristics and how the bike feels. That's one thing that's for sure. But, you know, these are probably pretty cheap to make, but the amount of R&D they put into finding that perfect amount of flex, they probably spent quite a bit of money doing that. The Yamahas are probably the easiest to do a top end on, mainly because of the backwards motor design. As soon as you take the seat off and take the tank off and the air box off, everything can just come right out the top, and you just have access to everything. There's nothing hard to reach for the most part. The throttle body's right up here up front, comes right off real easy. They're super easy to get access to anything you need to work on the bike. If you have to do a bottom end, it's really easy to get these motors out and back in. Electrical issues. I only see electrical issues, and I do, but I only see electrical issues on these bikes from the guys that pressure wash, it seems. And you know, the electrical stuff in this bike is not any different than your other Japanese bikes. They all use the same electrical components. All the Japanese bikes kind of buy their parts from the same manufacturers. And the wiring and all the terminals are up to the same standard as all your other Japanese bikes. I think the biggest difference is the reverse motor. So when you have a reverse motor like this, if you're a pressure washer, it's a lot easier to get right up on that throttle body. See the throttle body right there? It's a lot easier to just get your nozzle right up in there and gotta get all that dirt out, right? Well, you got your throttle position sensor right there. The throttle position sensors on these YZs go out quite often, but I mainly only see it from the pressure washing crowd. And the same's true with right up in here where your fuel tank is at, your fuel pump. You know, it's easy to get a pressure washer up in there. Here you go. You can go right from the bottom end of the bike here and shoot straight up and hit a whole bunch of electrical stuff with your pressure washer right there, and you can start pushing water right into electrical components. I have also seen more ECU failures on YZs than I have any other brand for whatever reason. And weird stuff too, like you shut the bike off but the fuel pump just stays running. Just weird stuff, or just glitchy. You know, they just get glitchy ECUs, and you have to replace the ECU to fix the bike. I see that more in the YZs than I do any other brand. I've seen Hondas, you know, have messed up ECUs, and Kawasaki's. You know, I've seen it Suzuki's and even KTM's, but I've seen it a lot more in the Yamahas than the other brands. Parts availability is great. The pricing of the parts are good. It's competitive with all your other Japanese bikes. They're typically good, affordable bikes. I would say the nice thing about the YZ, yes, you're going to pay a little bit more off the showroom floor than you would a KX or a RMZ. You're going to pay a little bit more, but you're probably not going to have to spend too much money in suspension or the motor right off the rip. It's going to be a good solid bike from day one. You're going to put it on the track. You're going to be happy with your purchase. They're really good bikes. They're not perfect, like I just mentioned. I just point out some of the shortcomings that they have. They're not perfect bikes by any means, but when you look at everything, they're definitely a good solid choice. Oh, another weak link on the YZs are the wheel bearings. They use some pretty cheap wheel bearings off the showroom floor. The back seem to hold up pretty well, even though they're cheap. They're pretty big and they hold up well. But the front, you're probably gonna have to replace your front wheel bearings at some point. It's just how it is with these YZs. They don't have the best front wheel bearings. So these are great bikes, but as you know, as of late, starting in 2022 and 2023, they corner a little sharper, but they're not quite as stable. So if you're looking for stability out of a bike, you might want to lean more towards the KX or maybe even the KTM. It's always good to test ride a bike before you buy one, like test ride one of your buddies or whatever. But you know, if you can deal with the more nervous feeling of the YZ, it's a good solid package. You're going to get your money's worth out of it. It's going to be a pleasure to own. They're easy to work on. Parts availability is good. The tuner app's awesome. You're just going to have to deal with a little bit of nervousness that they have. They're definitely, but they corner good. So another advantage of the Yamaha, at least the current trend of the past 5 years or so, is the resale value. Yamaha has the best resale value on the market as of right now. You know, that changes throughout the years, just depending, but as of the last 5 years, I would say Yamaha's hold their value up the most out of all the brands. One nice thing about the brand Yamaha is they do still make the two-stroke, the YZ250 and the YZ125. That's pretty awesome. Obviously, they have the YZ85 as well, but like I mentioned, if you're looking to race, you're probably going to be better with the KTM variant and on the small bores, small bikes. But as far as the 125s and the 250s, Yamaha makes one as well as KTM. Honda doesn't make a two-stroke anymore. Kawasaki doesn't make one anymore. They say they're going to bring one back, but I haven't seen it yet. And Suzuki doesn't make one anymore either. So if you're looking to get a two-stroke, you're kind of stuck picking between the Yamaha or the KTM variant two-strokes. Now, where do them two kind of, you know, well, the newer KTM variant two-strokes are fuel injection. And that does fit some people because it kind of softens the hit. It allows them to control the power delivery a little bit, through the electronics. And it kind of makes it feel a little bit more two-stroke-ish. So I have noticed some of your older guys like it, but some of the younger kids, well, they kind of prefer their old carbureted KTM more than they prefer their fuel-injected KTM because it lost about a horsepower and a half, and it doesn't quite have that raspy hit that you expect from a two-stroke. One of the issues with the fuel-injected two-strokes is a electronic fuel pump and more electronics in general. So when you have electronic fuel pump and more electronics in general, you have more of an electrical load. That electrical load is getting its electricity from the stator, from the generator. So that's pulling horsepower from the motor. And they're not making extra horsepower with the fuel injection on a two-stroke. Two-strokes don't benefit in the horsepower department from fuel injection like a four-stroke does. A four-stroke can because it allows for a downdraft intake, and there's all kinds of other reasons why. But on a two-stroke, since all the charge first goes down in the crank area and gets whooshed around and spun around in there before it comes up the transfer ports into the top end, the fuel injector doesn't really add any benefit to it. So besides them allowing to cater the power curve through the electronics, but as far as horsepower, the fuel injection doesn't bring extra horsepower on a two-stroke like it can on a four-stroke. So it seems like the older guys, or the guys that are more familiar with the four-strokes, kind of lean towards the KTM variant modern day two-strokes that have the fuel injection, where your more younger cats still prefer the hard-hitting carbureted versions, be it the KTM carbureted version, the older model, or the YZs. If you had to compare parts availability, well, obviously the Yamaha is going to beat the KTM in parts availability. You're going to run into far less stuff on back order. Parts pricing, the Yamaha parts pricing is going to be cheaper, and it's going to be cheaper to buy it brand new. Does that mean that the KTM is the lost cause? No, it's got its place. And the KTM, like let's say before they went fuel injection, when they were in the carbureted model, that was a pretty hot bike. You could buy it in bone stock form, and it ran pretty strong. But once they went fuel injection, things have kind of changed, and you have to do some mods to get it up to snuff. But that's where they're at today. One thing I will say, the cheapest, most budget-friendly bike you can own, motocross bike, is the YZ125. And the reason I say that is the YZ125 is extremely reliable. The parts are cheap, always available. The bike is the cheapest bike you can buy, pretty much. Motocross bike is probably the cheapest you can buy. The YZ125 is just a good solid bike if you're on a budget and you want to ride, or if your kid's racing. You can't beat that bike. Used parts are all over eBay, so if you ever need a part but you'll prefer a used one, you just got to get your bike up and going again, well, the YZ125 is great for that too. And even though from 2005 to 2021 the YZ125 wasn't the strongest in stock form, and you had to bring it home and do a few mods to it to get it up to the KTM level of that time, back when they were on carbureted, back when KTM was using carburetors, starting in 2022 Yamaha updated their YZ125, and now it's a much more potent machine. But more than that, it also handles mods even better than the previous model bike. Because of that, you might have noticed that you see a lot more of these young, fast kids on the YZ125 than previously. It's because it's a pretty dang good bike now. Good suspension, good strong motor, and it's affordable. It's probably, like I said, it is the most affordable bike, the motocross bike that you can buy today. And we all know two-strokes are the easiest bike to work on. They're easy to do a top end on. They're the easiest to do a bottom end on. They're just super easy. They're very roomy when you go to work on them. Very few tight spots. They're a pleasure to work on. But the new KTMs that are fuel injection, well, they bring a whole new electronics, right? So now you got an electronic fuel pump. You have electronic power valve. You have a battery, electric start, and all that. So they've taken a simple bike and kind of made it complicated. So if you're the type of guy that never want to pay someone to work on your bike, you want to figure out the problems on your own, and you're looking for a two-stroke, the YZ might be the way to go. If you don't like that hard-hitting two-stroke power, you want something a little bit more smooth and easier to ride, and you don't want to have to kick it, electric start, all that, you're probably going to lean towards the KTM variants. Alright, so these are my opinions from a mechanical perspective. You're welcome to disagree. These are just my opinions based on how I see it in the world that I live in. The best thing you can do if you're still on the fence of what brand bike you want to own is ride other people's bikes. Ride everyone's bike that will let you ride their bike. See which brands you kind of mold to or fits you, you know, and take all that in consideration. Because it's really tough just to go by the magazine shootouts. I mean, I've read the shootouts my whole life. I watch all the videos that you watch too. But sometimes what they say is the best bike or not a good bike, you'll test ride and you'll be like, no, actually that's a good bike. One example is in 2006, MXA said the KX250 was a bad bike. The frame wasn't right or whatever. I forgot what they said, but they kept blaming the frame. I absolutely loved that bike in 2006 and I owned one. So you can't always go by what the magazines say. It's really up to you. So take this information I've given you as far as how it is to own one mechanically and parts availability and all that, and see what you're good with. Test ride all your buddies' bikes. Anyone that will let you ride their bike, give it a shot. Take it for a spin. And then make your decision. Oh, that's pretty much a wrap. This weekend, I'm going to ride Motor Bros Okeechobee. At least that's the plan so far if the weather holds up. Not sure what bike I'm going to take out yet. I'm kind of itching to take the 125 out. But the 250 is a hard one to turn down too because it has that torque to get me over them big jumps. Don't forget to check down the description for the links to the videos that I mentioned earlier. Hope you guys all have a great weekend of riding. I appreciate every single one of you guys that watch these videos. Catch you in the next video. Oh, stay tuned for the suspension and chassis tune series video part number 4. I'm working on that one currently. I have my notes all written up. I just need to film it now. I'm going to have that out probably within a week. So I'll catch you then. See ya.